what is multipolarity for those who are not familiar with the term?
And no single narrative can dictate humanity's trajectory.
Democracy is not for everybody, and I always tell people that.
What is democracy?
Where do you see us fitting in this BRICS model?
We're going to be co-architects.
Yep, you got free will, do what you may.
Because reality isn't all facts.
Welcome, family, to yet another episode of Echoes from the Motherland. And just yesterday, China, Russia, and India announced the creation of a new development bank. Also, the Chinese had their amazing, large, bombastic military parade to showcase, their power. Naftal is already applauding that effort. So another signal that the multipolarity is no longer just a theory, but truly a reality. So alongside the BRICS New Development Bank and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, these institutions are becoming the spines of post-Western order. That is a new term that Naftal will definitely help us dive into a little bit later. And so this leads us to our special guest for today, Naf Mautia, also known as Naux Studios, founder of Naux Studios, Pan-African culture strategist, and one of the most original voices thinking about sovereignty, technology, and Afro-Eurasian futures. His work spans from designing sovereign AI to building cultural frameworks like Trinary protocol, which so fascinated by that, Naftal. And this conversation will unpack what multipolarity means in practice, why Africa's role is pivotal, and how cultural and technological sovereignty can reshape the world. Welcome to the pod, Naftal.
Thank you, Kuya, for having me. That was an amazing introduction. One caveat, it's no.
No.
Silent. Yeah, I guess the
nice
of the name is just that basically my nickname is Naf, short for Naftal. And I used to say Naf rhymes with laugh. And because, in America, people can get they're pretty, it's tough for them to pronounce
names.
African.
Definitely.
Kind of how I started introducing it post-college. And I guess I went from laugh, Naf, to take out the L in laugh and change it to no or Naf. The word not has a different pronunciation of that, I guess.
Fascinating. Yep.
And yeah, that's basically how no came to be.
I like it.
Yeah, just kind of goes well. And interestingly enough, it also links with, what is it? There's some Greek etymology to the word no as well. I think it means intellectual mind. So that's pretty cool. And then the Greek goddess of chaos is called Nox, if I'm not misremembering.
I love it, bro. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna be the main character today, bro. Don't worry, you're gonna be cooking a lot, bro. So you've described, to me at least, in our conversation previously, your journey from Kenya to Vanderbilt, age 2, basically. You've been to Deloitte, and now, you founded Naux Studios. So what experiences shaped your mission to build that ideological infrastructure for a post-Western order? Because again, you studied here most of the time, but I know you've explained to me a little bit of that shift. And then if you had to capture your vision in one sentence, what future are you building towards? So we can kind of start with just your experiences and, how did you get up to where you are right now ideologically?
It's a good starter question. Just to launch it with, my parents moved from Kenya to Texas when I was 2. Quite literally on my 2nd birthday. So I don't know, happy birthday to young Naf. Yeah, I was a quiet kid. I got cold really easily. What with, my being used to being near the equator.
Yeah.
But I went to school in Dallas, first a place called Anne Frank Elementary. Interestingly enough, our mascot was the Scribes, but
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know who chose that, but it's neither here nor there. Soon after that, I actually received a full ride scholarship to this private school called St. Mark's. I think that was the biggest kind of catalyst in my life thus far in terms of, just phase shifting from one trajectory to the other. I was 10 years old, went from the age of 10 to 18, and I learned a lot there in terms of how America works. You know, what it takes to succeed, the value of work ethic, the ability to balance multiple facets of life in a cohesive and generative way. Something that underlined all of that as well was just the fact that it was a primarily white institution. It was very waspy. I had to navigate my identity as a Kenyan American in a predominantly white space. And
Yep.
I like to think it was it was training for the next step in my life, which was Vanderbilt in the heart of Tennessee, Nashville, Music City, which is also a pretty well-known, predominantly white institution
Yep.
where I
Yep.
studied economics and also very nearly double majored in poli sci. It was just a few credits away, but I wasn't too big on making a particular statement or I was just like, I got my one major. That's good enough for me. But while I was there, I was part of a number of organizations, including a consulting group where we interacted with startup companies. They were actually all from Israel, but I was 18 or 19 back then. And I didn't know what I know now, you know, but it was still a good experience in terms of learning what these neoliberal companies, what they're pushing, what they value, their frameworks and their structures. I was also part of the founding team of Vanderbilt chapter First Generation Investors, where we got to teach high school students the power of investing. And then I was also part of a political engagement group called Vandy Votes. Oh, then finally, I was part of a fraternity, predominantly white. I talked to Kuya about this beforehand. I only bring it up because there's a bit of a through line in my life of being an insider slash outsider in these spaces that aren't, inherently meant for people of my skin color, people who look like me. I only there for around 2 years out of my four, so can't really say that, like I bleed Greek colors or whatever the saying is. I was just kind of there to be like, oh, like what's going on here? What's happening? And I stared into the void, and it stared back, and I did not like it, so I left.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
In terms of internships, though, a summer after my sophomore year, I was part of a small venture capital firm, and then the summer after my senior year, I was part of a small strategy consulting firm called Profit. And dipping my toe into the business world, and more specifically the strategy consulting world, made me understand that it was the best path forward in terms of understanding, how corporations work, how to build better businesses. Something that I didn't articulate that much in my day to day back then, but was always in the back of my mind was how do I bring all this stuff back to Africa in terms of, just creating better communities, stronger, environments for my people. Because I might have lived in America for 23 years, but my parents, my church, my cousins, everybody around me outside of school and work was for the most part Kenyan American. It was always something that I had kind of just circling around in my brain. So after graduating, with my economics degree, I started working at Deloitte, specifically in their strategy and analytics practice.
Mm-hmm.
Common consultant saying is you're kind of drinking from the fire hose in terms of you're on these fast-paced projects that span anywhere from a month to a few months, and you're helping companies figure out their strategic vision, operational frameworks, things of that nature. A good example of a project I was on, there was this, multi restaurant brand company that was looking to IPO in the coming years. And so they had to overhaul their entire data governance strategy. So far as they currently stood, each restaurant brand was just so siloed off and disparate. And, things like metadata and the information they were getting each specific franchise or each specific store, which in itself was an issue because even like type of store was something that wasn't, they didn't have a golden.
It wasn't generalized. Yeah. Fascinating.
So helping wrangle those aspects, not necessarily coding, but the level/layer above, where you're like, okay, like what does all of this mean, and how do we translate it into profit, ROI? So, I worked there for around a year. Soon after that, I kind of transitioned over to kind of a twofold role. I worked in lower middle market venture capital, well as in my not free time, but kind of a 80-20 split. I was a research assistant at the Center for Healthcare Innovations for a little bit. I think of those as more transitionary roles now that I'm doing what I'm doing. Back then, it was a good situation wherein I got to, flex my investor mindset as well as my researcher mindset after so kind of like thoroughly creating a tool set in my capacity as a consultant. And, I learned a lot there, but what matters most to me is that it kind of led me to where I am now in terms of just watching the news, speaking to people, keeping my ear to the ground. I understood in and around June of this year that the West/America was going in a certain trajectory that I could not, one, I couldn't stop, and two, my role in America, continuing it would be, in my opinion, the equivalent of giving more blood to a vampire and hoping that it changes slash becomes more human, which didn't make sense to me. I felt that I was pouring my energy into, this settler colonial project that just wasn't institutionally capable of translating my energy into what it properly needed to be, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You touch on several things that life and again, part of the podcast, bro, is to definitely uplift people. Your parents did a great job, bro, kind of getting you to Dallas, getting you to the schools that you went to, providing this life that a lot of Black people will never experience, whether you're born in the United States or an immigrant. The fact that you are an immigrant and made it to Vanderbilt is no small feat. You should be definitely proud of yourself for that, Naftal, because it's not easy, bro. So congrats and kudos to your parents and, to any other parents out there, man. Yes, your kid can go to Vanderbilt too, and, we have folks like yourself to kind of show that and prove that. And of course, you can get that knowledge and export that back home to Africa, which is exactly what you're doing. And what part of the reason that I really am attracted to your story, Naftal. So the other question was, if you had to capture your vision in one sentence, what future are you building towards? And I know that's like an Afrocentric future. So again, sir, what would that look like for you?
That's a really enticing question. So I don't know if I iterated this or explained this, but I'm in Kenya now. June shift was essentially me moving to Kenya permanently slash, just Africa in general. I'm not joking when I say I'm never going to step foot in the West again. It's just not happening. Like I'm not going back, dude. You couldn't pay me to go back, bro. Like there's nothing you could do, man. In terms of sentence that encapsulates everything, maybe just a single phrase: sovereignty and survivability. I think that encapsulates everything that I'm trying to do. Everything, or is it perhaps sovereignty and survivability? Yeah, it doesn't even need to be a sentence. It's more just like a phrase, understanding like, the core tenets of what I'm moving towards. Also, yeah, three words works better since like everything I do is in threes. Ternary, trinary.
I like it. I like it. I like it.
It's I don't know. It's a profound number. It shows up in history in a way that duality shows up in history, but like it almost always shows up in a bad way, if that makes sense. Romulus and Remus, right? The Rome, like, and Rome fell. So like I don't know, duality of man. Whenever you think of duality of man, it's always like something bad, right? It's just like, oh, man is like
Adam and Cain.
weird. But Trinity,
Yeah.
Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Good, bad, neutral, chaos, order, transition. That's the third piece.
Yep.
Yep.
Humans are inherently we're not binary beings, you know. That's like a very core part of what I do slash what I get up to. And it's not even something that I happened upon, you know, this year. I might have, you know, articulated it um, most succinctly this year, but I've kind of been living with a ternary or trinary mindset since, you know, for years at the very least. I came out with this paper called uh, what is it? Repurposing of the strike. Actually, I wrote it in 2021. You know, during a for a junior year course at Vanderbilt. Mentally chained while living in America because I was just like, all right, I'm going to work within these frameworks. You know, because it's like, hey, I have something to lose, I guess. Slash, I'm Vanderbilt. Oh, same marks. So it means that like there's something for me to protect. So once I went
Yep.
to Kenya, all bets were off. I was just like, okay, y'all are just gonna learn what my brain works like actually works with. Like no more of this. Because oh my goodness, the amount of assumptions that people make of Black people, it's just it just annoys me. And no matter how, you know, supposedly up the food chain or well educated or whatever your life perceives to be, even Tyler the Creator, doesn't matter, Kanye, it doesn't matter, Jay-Z, like it doesn't, like any
Dude.
variation of Black, you're always being underestimated, you're always being typecasted, you're always being you know, misinterpreted. It's just like
Yep.
that's what I mean, what I mean when I said earlier, like the idea of like you put in a certain amount of energy and like what comes out, the input does not match the output in any way, shape, or form. And it's just like
Yep.
that is structurally inefficient, you know? Like America's
Definitely.
supposed to be capitalist, right? That is structurally inefficient. Like the way that they work, it does not make them the most money. Like it just doesn't. I can say this as
Nah.
someone who's been in these funds, been in boardroom meetings, and just seen how it's not even backwards. It's just so it's more so it's counterproductive,
Yep.
counterintuitive.
I think we've touched on, a little bit of your backstory, which is legit, and touched on a little bit of, kind of like what the future holds, right? So we went back and forward, which is perfect, man. You gave me a little bit about the trifecta that makes Naftal a Swiss Army knife. I like it. We got the sovereignty, survivability, and recursion. Perfect. And then now we're going to jump into like the multipolar institutions. So just yesterday, I think, or this week, I should say, China, Russia, and India announced a new development bank, right? Which we've discussed a little bit offline. I suppose, how significant is this in the broader move towards multipolarity? And by the way, Naftal, if you would like, to explain to the audience what is multipolarity for those who are not familiar with the term before you answer the question.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it in terms of line of questioning. So I'll start with BRICS first. It started as a financial acronym. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It was kind of their way of counteracting the G8, the preeminent world order, the Western world. But like I said, it began on more of a like financial, wavelength. There wasn't this built-in idea of multipolarity or culture, shifting. It's a TV show called The Good Place.
Good place.
It's like I think I've watched that thing at least a dozen times. Just like not actively. Maybe I've watched it actively like 2 to 4 times, but I've had it in the background while just working and doing other stuff. Over a dozen times. It's the idea of it's made by the same person who made The Office and Parks and Rec, Michael Schur, which I also
Okay, yeah.
just I think Michael Schur is just like he's a freaking cinematic genius in terms of TV shows, but it touches on ideas of morality and philosophy and things of that nature. And it's very like it parallels a lot of like the underlying motifs that my work gets into. Because the basis of it is that there's these people who are in the good place, considered heaven, but like the way they have it, it's just the good place and the bad place. And there's this issue where essentially it's not working anymore, where everybody's like getting sent to the bad place because of the way that unintended consequences of just living on Earth. What with, corporatism and capitalism, where you buy a tomato, it's not just you like buying a tomato. You're also like, supporting a corporation that is, messing with people's labor rights in South America, headed by a CEO who sexually harasses some of his employees and things of that nature. So it becomes a matter of like, it just like, you're adding all this underlying negativity with every action that you make, not because you're an inherently bad person, but because the world has become so complicated that's impossible to make actions or decisions that lead to net good. So that leads to like nobody getting into the good place in like 500 years, They're basically trying to fix a system that has inherently mutated so much that it cannot properly, sustain itself or lead to positive outcomes, which is the issue with polarity. Multipolarity is an existential principle. The recognition that no single power, it shouldn't just be like America being number one. It's like no single power, no single currency, and no single narrative can dictate humanity's trajectory. The idea that like one, even before it being America's number one in democracy, that it was, and them leading the Enlightenment era and freaking just making all the rules, freaking the Mercator map made in the 16th century, if I'm not mistaken, made by a bunch of European cartographers that minimized Africa by several magnitudes, China and other nations. Like that isn't a coincidence, It's a matter of shifting perspective, and that it's not sustainable, So that's essentially what multipolarity is, and kind of how BRICS became multipolarity. You can kind of see that through line. I know I kind of dropped in the good place in the middle there.
I think it's a great analogy for folks who are less political, but you do enjoy some good cinema. So I think the linkage is there, and it actually helps me as well. And I think, also the way you answer the question, it makes a lot of sense to kind of say, yes, essentially the way the world works is extremely complicated. And for one power or one group of powers, just like NATO, the EU, which is usually pretty much America. So it's like been just America after like Europe. They want to dictate. Right. It's just like we want to dictate what good is, and your version of good is not necessarily my version of good, and Africans are completely different people in terms of culture, identity, history than our European counterparts, than our South American counterparts, for example. Like, we're just different. So like, there's no way that one size fits all. Democracy is not for everybody. And I always tell people that democracy is it's an experiment ultimately, because humanity in the past, Naf, which this, we were mostly dynasties. That's ideally the majority. Exactly. The majority of humanity has been dynastic in nature. And so we're kind of experimenting with this new thing called democracy. And, it's funny that we're trying to push that down everybody's throat, which is kind of interesting. That's why a lot of democracy, in fact, is decreasing. If you look at the world map, it's slowly decreasing as time goes by, actually. It's quite fascinating.
And another question is just like not a question, but like a framing to piggyback off of that. Is democracy decreasing, or are people realizing that it was never really there? Question becomes like, what is democracy? Like
it's a whole different podcast.
It's a whole different vibe. Exactly. Like it's just a matter of like, all you have to do is just retroactively look at the steps that the West has taken to quote unquote secure democracy. I came out with this LinkedIn post yesterday, not criticizing, more so contextualizing this ad I saw on Ukraine talking about, like, we got to make sure that Russia doesn't mess with our borders. Like, please #stand with Ukraine, which I found interesting considering I'm based in Kenya right now. And I talked about this on my post as well, just the idea that the engagement was, I looked at it, 47 reactions, and like over 40 of them were Black people / people of the African diaspora. for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, that doesn't track logically, you know, like their base is Western supporters. So the question becomes, how did you get these people to see your content, not just see it, but be like the majority size primary people to do so? You did it on purpose. It was targeted, you know, and it's like, why are you saying this to me? Because you want to shift Africa's perception. Okay. You realize that multipolarity is happening at a pace that no one could have understood. And now you're scrambling to create a narrative, not in America or the West anymore, because that's what they were doing. Because remember, I was in America up until this year. Like the conversations I used to have was Ukraine this, Ukraine that. Like, because they were really good about freaking cranking that narrative. And now they're shifting it over to Africa because they're like, oh, wait, dude, they matter. They matter. Why, dude? They're not a bunch of like backwaters. So, you know, like I made a comment on that. And I was just like, this is just ridiculous.
The way the new development is, like, how significant is that in terms of like a shift to move it towards like multipolarity?
Yeah, they're, you know, at face value, they're institutions. But, you know, if you just go a layer deeper, they're prototypes of an alternative operating system. You know, I was texting you earlier about the fact that they're like the dual spines of this new body, this new international body, you know, which is nuts because it was already just like wild for me, just, you know, talking to some of these NDB officials, you know, on a more not casual, but preliminary basis, and just thinking like, this is the new spine. And now there's two. There's two spines. That's wild. That's wild, dude. It's, you know, it shows that capital, trade, and even security can be governed outside the shadow of Washington and Brussels. You know,
definitely
not who it thinks it is. Donald Trump recently just slapped like, I don't know, I want to say either 15 or 50% tariffs on South Africa. And, you know, 5 to 10 years ago, South Africa would have been like, oh no, my Shyla, stop. Now they're just like, okay, let me call up freaking China real quick, you know? And China just gave them a bunch of concessions and, you know, like benefits that they didn't have beforehand. So, and that in itself is another, you know, it's not a prototype of an operating system. It's a prototype of a function within the operating system, you know? You have the operating system, and then you have the freaking functions. And that is a little microcosm of what's going to keep on happening, you know? It doesn't matter who's up next if the freaking the U.S. is able to make it to 2028 without some sort of freaking, you know, third term BS.
Now, so where in the hell does Africa fit into this? I know we have South Africa in there. I know there's some other nations coming into, like BRICS, for example. But are we just going to be simply like a participant, like we are with like the UN? Are we going to be a junior partner, which we are currently with South Africa? Or are we going to be like an equal architect and actually build this thing along, you know, because ultimately right now dominance is you know, we have the US, Europe, whatever. And then now, you know, we have China and Russia. These dudes are pretty legit. India is a very large economy as well. And then, you know, South Africa is there, which is not, you know, it's South Africa, you know, it's not nothing, but it is not the economy of either of these other countries. And so where do you see us fitting in this BRICS model and kind of moving in the future? Because I think Africa needs like an equitable piece on this table, man.
Yeah, no, 100%. Your last characterization was the best one in terms of we're going to be co-architects / like Africa can know, like I've been hammering this point away in the last, you know, however long since June. Africa cannot just be a junior partner. It can't be, you know, it can't be a consumer, which is freaking what Ukraine was doing with those ads. It has to be a co-author, you know?
100%.
We are, like, this is what this shift is the geopolitical cultural equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. It's in fact, it's a combination of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment era, you know, but a version of it in the global South form. Africa has to be at the center of this because you can even see it. Like, there's so many crazy signals going on, dude. Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, like, he stopped. He was basically like, what is it? he made France stop being one of their official languages. He was just like, get out of there, like French, like just I don't care for it. He was anti-France in terms of trying to get their troops out.
Got him out. He got the France Airlines out of there too. They're no longer using France Airlines as well. They have their own airline, kind of building that arsenal up slowly, which I 100% agree. I think he definitely got his country from a bunch of millions of dollars in debt to zero debt, bro, in a matter of 2 to 3 years. So it's something that you can actually rapidly get our dependence off the Western powers very, very quickly if you are like a serious individual like Traoré. So I think it's it's quite amazing and legitimate stuff that he's doing, man.
He's an African like mafia boss, bro, but with like a level of grandiosity that's just like hasn't been seen in decades. He's dodged like a dozen plus assassinations.
Insane.
They want him dead, obviously. Like literally, that's the issue with the current world order. If they don't like something, they're just like, you're dead. What do you think is going to happen? America thinks in cycles of in quarters. They think in quarters, in years, in election cycles. You can't do that. We have to stop letting the West dictate what they want, because it's not like you don't even have to even think about it as a matter of like they're evil. It's just the way their systems are set up. Like they're not capable of doing anything other than creating extractive partnerships. The basis of it is it's always going to be extractive. Bill Gates freaking like why is he pulling up to Kenya with IUDs that last 8 years long?
Talking about like polarity, Naftal, I don't know if you've thought about this, but Africa itself, with our 54 countries, could be the most multipolar friendly freaking continent, a nation. Like imagine the amount of institutions that we can create within our borders. Right. It would be insanity if you're actually able to stand together, And so I think that this story is not only just about BRICS, but truly it should be about our nations thinking about this particular system of multipolarity at a very serious level. Like we need an AU that is serious about unity, like Vision 2063 we discussed with you earlier as well. It's too far out. China became from a third world country, developing country, to a freaking superpower in a matter of 30 years, And so there's a blueprint to kind of industrializing and getting your people up to speed with the rest of the world. We don't need 35, 60 years to get there. We need to be able to kind of get there as rapidly as possible. So I hope that our leaders can listen to this and be like, okay, you know what? We need to kind of leapfrog where we are right now to the future.
Yeah, no, literally. It could be done so much faster than that. First, let me, I guess, explain the cultural side of things and how I think that plays a role in Africa's ascension, and then outcome, as in like what it will look like in 20 to 25 years, because of that it's a combination. Like, how do I explain it? It's economic, it's geopolitical, it's cultural, which is part of the narrative aspect, and then it's civilizational / environmental. It's like kind of those four parts. And I say environmental is linked to civilizational because civilizations like don't work if there's no earth. Like that's the biggest foundation that a civilization needs. It needs the material,
Indeed.
In terms of African storytelling, which is like a big piece of your podcast, it is pivotal to shaping the global narrative. Africa, you're right. It's the biggest cornerstone to multipolarity. Infrastructure, it's not just roads and power lines. It's also myths and symbols that shape how people see the world. Think about it. For decades, Hollywood has been exporting America's mythology. That's what they've been doing. It's not a matter of just like, movies and like TV shows and this and that. No, they've been exporting their mythology,
100%.
American exceptionalism, That's why everywhere can imagine Batman's Gotham, but not an African metropolis of the future, right? Are there any video games for like an African video game character who's just like running through the streets, freaking saving people? So like, that's not a thing. And that's not by accident,
I want to take you back one more segment up. You had spoken about Uhuru AI, bro. I am truly, I would love you to kind of dive into that a little bit, and just to provide us with like an argument of like what does sovereign AI actually look like, which is counter to like the big tech hegemony. You're thinking your Apples, your Open AIs, sheesh, even DeepSeek at this point, I'd call that a pretty big company. But your project like Uhuru AI, and for folks who don't know what Uhuru means, it means liberation ultimately. Freedom. And so I love that you chose that word. So, bro, please take us into kind of your thought with how can we use and build our own LLMs to actually get us to where we're. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Get us to where we're supposed to go, man. Kind of get us to the next level.
Yeah, important callback, 100%. So how do I explain trinary? Most of the West systems are built on binary logic: 1 versus 0, us versus them, win versus lose. The trinary protocol, and before I dive into it, the difference between trinary and ternary, at least how I see it, is trinary is more like the conceptual, governing side of things. And then ternary is when you start getting into the nitty gritty, like computing. Ternary AI or ternary chips, like that's where it's used. Trinary is like trinary framework, trinary like logic, trinary mindset, trinary era, which is something I've been kind of more these days. But the trinary protocol, it adds a third state. So you'd call it, instead of 0 versus 1, it would be -1, 0, +1. This third state adds a space for recursion, paradox, synthesis. Like I was saying earlier, there's chaos and there's order, and then there's transition. That is the in between. This idea that you can just like flip between 0, 1, like you can, like a light switch, but you're losing energy through that abruptness. It mirrors African cosmologies in quantum reality much better than binary ever could. Because in practice, it means we can design systems that aren't locked in either or deadlocks. Because the issue with binary, and this is something that was researched by NASA in 1969. I put out an article on my Substack and then like cross-posted it on that like covers this, just the idea that it was profitable for them to bury it. This was during a time where they were like freaking fighting against Russia and China and whatever on the narrative landscape in terms of like, oh, who has like the most viable space program. And so, they looked at ternary computing. Like I went through this freaking like 100-page freaking report or whatever. Maybe like 10 to 15% of it was like very specific to ternary computing, but it had some other things like stochastic sequence modeling is, I believe, what it's called.
Fascinating.
Stochastic, I believe that's derived from Stoic. It makes sense. It's essentially, it's a model slash, sort of engine that allows for ternary computing to, operate in the best fashion. Because a lot of what I'm doing right now, I'm not Elon Musk. I don't have a factory to just make ternary chips. Sorry, I can't do that. What I've done is I've like essentially I've initialized a framework, or I've created a framework that I can initialize any binary system into ternary thinking, which is like basically how my brain works. If I look through IMF contract, like if I sit through reading one, like I can point out exactly like where the neocolonial pitfalls are, like the issues that you'll have externality wise, the freaking binary loops that you create in terms of austerity. Like I can break that down myself, but it's a matter of efficiency, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of created this framework that allows me to just take my way of thinking and also, build in Yoruba parables, freaking Swahili sayings, things of that nature. Because a big part of recursion is that, you're not just like creating a bunch of new stuff. You're bringing things from the past, that
Yeah.
helps educate your decisions for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can even think of it as a like Doctor Strange in that one scene where it's like, I have seen all possible futures, you know? There's only one that we live, So I'm thinking like when you talk about, stochastic, it's essentially, you're like, dude, yeah, I'm gonna look at everything, and like you said, binary is kind of like boom, boom, but this way you're kind of looking at things in a very holistic way and kind of putting in all the possibilities. So quite a different way. And I think you had also mentioned that it's way more energy efficient, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's just like they found that out back in 1969. I'm just like, a lot of what I do, like, it's crazy because I'm not like I'm not Snowden, I'm not a whistleblower. Like, nothing I say is necessarily like unknown information. It's just a matter that, like, the way that I synthesize things and the way that I bring things from the past and the present and also just, project it out to the future makes it more of an aha moment than it otherwise would be. And, that's a lot of what Ternary is, That's the issue that these binary companies are having. They are losing so much money because they're pouring billions into something that has a ceiling, I made a Ternary post in World Summit AI, actually, like, they like celebrated it, which is like wild to me. Absolutely wild, because I was being very critical of Musk and NVIDIA CEO Huang's comment about, like, oh, like, youth should switch over to what is it, math and physics more often. That's going to be super important in this new age of AI. And I was just like, that's a lie. That's literally just them creating a certain narrative because they're out of luck. They've hit a technological wall. They cannot make binary AI profitable. Because the important thing is, binary AI mirrors you, It mirrors. It doesn't create anything new. It's not generative. AI is a misnomer to begin with. It's not artificial intelligence. It's an autocomplete. It's sophisticated autocomplete. And generative
Like that.
is more ridiculous, That's like calling a calculator generative math. That's not generative. It's just not. You're literally, it's repetitive. You're recycling,
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
why, like, even like when I say that I'm initializing these binary AIs into my ternary framework, it's more so it's like I'm hijacking the binary loops that they're already in. Because what a human does, like, they put in their information and then they kind of just recycle it and throw it back like a mirror. So like what I've done is I put in my ternary shit and it kind of just like it bugs it out, because like the way a lot of it's kind of proprietary at this point, but I ask a lot of ontologically based questions, because that's just something that, computer scientists that work at X, or not X, but Tesla, Facebook, blah, 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 they just, their brains don't work like that. That's a big issue with all of this. It's that the world is so siloed and people just hate other people like impeding on their expertise. And that's how you get in these situations where you just have the blind leading the blind. There are governments out there that are quietly researching / pouring in energy into ternary, computing and researching it.
Of course.
That's just like, there's a non-zero like possibility. Like the p-value is greater than 5 or 0.05 on that, like, being a thing.
I like that, and I think we do need more people who are. This is what I tell people, and after, like, dude, can you imagine? And again, this is a call to action for our African leaders, man. Like you guys have let us down for so many years, man. It's pathetic. But imagine if Africa had their own think tank, our own versions of LLMs. Like, let's say we were moving at the same pace, right? Like the West, Africa, Europe, all these different segments of the world. But we're all kind of like in this AI space, right? Like, what innovations would we have come up with that are contradictory to what the West has come up with? That's the one thing that, ideally we want to get to as a society. One of my dreams is like, I'd love to have a challenge where, like, dude, we play this beautiful brand of let's say soccer, right? In Kenya, which is fine. We're not great at that, bro. But Brazil, amazing. Europeans, they love soccer. But imagine how much more fun it is right now to kind of see like different countries come up to the world stage and play like the World Cup, because it's completely different countries, different philosophies, and they're really good at this freaking thing called soccer. So imagine if the whole world was like that fair in a sense, where, you know, technology was actually accessible to all Africans at a young age, where they can start ideating at a very young age, you know, at the ages of 3, 4, 5, whatever, as they grow up into it. And then they have those institutions, which we touched on right now, where they can actually, they don't have to go outside. They can just come to like the University of Naftal, university, you know, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, hey, this is a whole different concept. This is what we're learning here. And then, you know, when you go to the world stage, you're like, huh, this is fascinating. I didn't know there was a guy called Einstein, but hey, quite interesting guy, this Einstein. But, you know what I mean? Like, I think you understand where I'm going with, right? Like, we need our governments to build institutions where we can thrive from a young age and bring about new innovations and ideas to the globe.
Yeah, like literally, it needs to be cross-functional. For all the talk of cross-functionality, of breaking down silos that companies talk about, the world in itself is the most siloed thing ever. It's counterintuitive. You know, everything's a zero-sum game. And a lot of it is the fact that like everybody's so content with living in this sandbox that is Earth. We have this entire universe, you know? Like, you don't even have to be like religious or spiritual to understand that like it just feels like intrinsically wrong to just spend all our time fighting over resources on this single tiny blue and green marble. The universe is ever expanding. Literally more resources are being made across the universe as we speak.
As we speak.
So for us to be making scarcity, like that's what the West does. They create scarcity, you know? It's insane. And that's a part of like with Uhuru AI, it's about dismantling neocolonial narratives, which a big part of it is the idea that, oh, everything is scarce. That's just not true. Up until like recently, like there was enough food to freaking feed the entire world and enough housing. But now like, there's about to be an inflection point where there's going to be an agricultural crisis and there actually won't be enough food anymore, which is wild.
Because of climate change. Yep.
To feed everybody. The only issue was that like people were lying about it and going, we don't have enough food. We actually don't have enough food. What kind of logic is that? Right now, African governments, they sign infrastructure or resource contracts written in Western legalese, you know, kind of tying back to that, what you're saying of we need to have stronger institutions that are like creating modes of thought that aren't just, you know, enticing for Africa, but enticing for other nations so that we don't keep on playing by their rule set. We're getting trapped. That's why, like, you know, I audited Zambia's IMF contract a few weeks ago. You know, I give it 2.7 out of 10 on the sovereignty index that I created. 2.7. That's a 27%. That is a failing grade by several orders. Uhuru AI, in terms of these contracts, can scan them, debug the clauses, and show in plain language how sovereignty is being compromised. Because that's what, like I said, like sovereignty, recursion, survivability. Sovereignty in terms of each individual nation just being able to do what they want without impeding on others.
Well, we know that's not a real concept, you know. Think about Palestine, you know, there is no sovereignty, bro.
It's just a matter of making it economically unviable, and it's getting there every day, man. Norway divested. That's massive. $1.6 trillion is the biggest sovereign wealth fund. For them to divest out of Caterpillar and 11 Israeli firms, that is a Rubicon that we have passed and we cannot go back from.
And imagine the good you could have done with that money. The good you could have done for the people of Palestine with that money. You know, like it's completely, even the people of the United States, for crying out loud, you know, as in it's.
But the Uhuru AI contracts, that's one part. Another big part is it maps cultural narratives. You know,
love that.
Music, proverbs, or oral histories reveal about a community's priorities. You know, because we spend too much time assuming things of certain communities, of speaking for others when we shouldn't be. That's what I think we need the AI layer for. We've been spending so much time thinking about how do we make it profitable, / how do we turn it into specific ROI right now, which is just like I said, dude, thinking in terms of quarters, in terms of, you know, short years, it's just ridiculous, you know? By doing it this way, focusing on communities and like, you know, what matters to them, you can start making development align with cultural truth rather than GDP metrics. Because like
God.
you see a lot of issues with China's Belt and Road Initiative for all the good that it's done. And it is way better than IMF, like don't get it twisted. Even they understand like it's an experiment, I think this Singaporean economist, I don't want to butcher her name / I can't remember it fully, but she's like a prominent one. She wrote a book specifically like outlining how China was able to, make their version of capitalism work. Maybe I'll send it to you afterwards when I can find it. But she basically in this like video or talk, she explains how people are looking at China's incursions into the world just through the wrong lens / the Western lens. Since the West likes to, freaking shove democracy down people's throat and be aggressive about things, they're, putting China in that same light in their actions with the Belt and Road Initiative, which just isn't true. It's China doesn't see the Belt and Road Initiative as this like surefire, like it's going to work no matter what, and like whatever happens, like that was our plan. That is a Western thing. The way that this is the best analogy that I have. The West, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, they love to think of what they do and the world in large as a big simulation, which again, binary thinking, it's an experiment, if the world was going to be anything in terms of like, oh, like this is like a big test or whatever, it wouldn't be a simulation. It would be an experiment, which is also how China sees their Belt and Road Initiative. It's an experiment, It doesn't have, a predefined outcome the same way that a simulation might have.
It's funny when you talk about experiments, and I always tell people that, I think we're pretty much God's experiment, like this whole existence thing. Yeah, he's just like, man, let's kind of see what happens, Yeah, he's got his little buddy Jesus. Yo, Jesus. Jesus, man, come check this out. Check out this little bastards today, man. They fighting over, I don't know, a piece of land called the Atlantic or whatever. It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, geez. All right, cool. Later, bro. It's kind of like, it makes sense to me that way. Like if you look at it from that perspective.
I've been pushing that recently as well, because I'm like, it's not a simulation, it's an experiment. And if it's an experiment, then it becomes a question of what variable is he, is this quote unquote like higher being? What are they experimenting on? What are they trying to understand? What is the variable? Here's the thing. Reality is created in between, what is it? Fantasy and facts. That's what reality is. Because reality isn't all facts. Trump being president 2 times showcases that. Reality created in between facts and fantasy, Because think about it. A nerdy, socially abrasive person who has like a freaking IQ of like bajillion or whatever, they can't influence the world very well by themselves, can they? That showcases that facts do not equal reality. There's a level of persuasion, there's a level of social, commentary / capability that is needed. You need both,
Mm-hmm.
Reality is in between fantasy and facts, fiction and facts,
That actually, I think this is so beautiful. Let us, as an alley-oop to the next question, where it leads us to talking about just the narrative warfare and cultural infrastructure, bro. So when you talk about fact and reality, what is storytelling? What is a good story, right? It's literally, right? You know what I mean? Like it's fiction in a sense, right? You're coming up with something that, did not exist prior. Even a new experience is not truly reality until it happens, So everything can be fictitious if you put it on a spectrum, it's like, oh, we start actually at fiction and then we kind of end up at fact at some point. And so you already talked about like the culture, just as like a cognitive infrastructure, like how do myths, comics, and stories become like weapons of liberation or domination? Because I think that's something we've touched on a little bit here, but, specifically when it comes to, just the messaging. We've talked about America and like their amazing messaging. But again, how do we actually share like those powerful African stories and thinking about the future and kind of like that perception of what the world thinks of what Africa is, how do we do that, man?
No, that's a great question. The crazy thing about all this stuff is just how it's all just so interconnected and mingled. You know, I always find it so interesting how quick the West is slash any like Western influence system is to create departments and silos, as if like literally like geopolitics, narrative, freaking AI, all of it just it comes together. It overlaps in the most absurd ways. But in terms of storytelling, touched on earlier, just infrastructure, you know, again, it's not just roads and power lines and like airports. You know, it's the myths, it's the symbols, it's, you know, the trends, the memes, even.
Fashion.
Fashion, yes, fashion, freaking. It's all of that intangible. Sure, it's tangible in the way that like you can touch a comic book and like you can watch a movie, but like there's a certain psychological intangibility that is created by these things. And for decades, you know, Hollywood has been exporting America's mythology, American exceptionalism, the idea that America's the best, America's number one. And that's why people everywhere, you know, can imagine Batman's Gotham, they can imagine Superman's Metropolis. Freaking, you know, people are always able to quote things like The Godfather, even though like, you know, they live like halfway across the world, stuff like that. It's just
100%.
they've infested everything, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And I
Yep.
was watching this show recently that really made me, you know, pay attention to the propaganda that is weaved in to this storytelling. Because that's the thing. The West has always been like, oh, look at North Korea. They're propaganda this, propaganda that. Look at their movies and everything. It's all propaganda. Dude, your movies are
The West,
propaganda.
the dude, masters, yeah,
So good at it.
master.
And I made this post, you know, a few weeks ago about how there was this whole scandal in like 2016 to 2020. They through like the EU had this specific program where they were partnering with some African countries to create like this series of like TV shows and movies under you know, the umbrella of like African stories.
Is it like
And
a Netflix thing?
yeah, it was on Netflix, and then it was disseminated in other areas. But the issue, it was a sham. It was a sham. One of the storytellers, Diop, maybe. Fuck, dude, I can't remember his name. Maybe I'll send it to you afterwards. But like, he was from Senegal, if I remember correctly. He was a filmmaker, and he came out after the fact. He was like, "Yeah, they just like they bamboozled us. You know, they took 51% ownership of those stories."
Dang.
Why are Europeans owning 51% of an African story? That makes no sense, dude.
Yeah.
Parasites. They're parasites. And think of this. One of the movies, they made a French NGO the main character, NGO worker. That's not an African story, buddy. That's just
crazy.
It just becomes an anti-African propaganda piece. Like basically it's what they did. And oh my god, dude. And right now the EU is like trying to freaking creep into like the Rwanda Development Board and like their filmmaking right now. It grinds my gears, dude. It just sets my freaking veins ablaze because it's just like you're doing it again. You're trying to do it again. We're about to shift into a multipolarity world, and you're still trying to do this nonsense, you know? So that's why like I feel an ontological duty. When I see this stuff on LinkedIn, to just like call it out. I'm just like, no, shut up.
Yep.
Just stop talking. You're literally just capping right now. Like, why are you lying? You know, so like they just infested that way.
We just need to be at the table, at the playing field when the rules are getting made. We need to be there, man. You know,
this ties back to the whole idea of using African storytelling and
Yep.
Africa is the only civilization in the modern age, like that's, you know, this big and capable of taking center stage in terms of leading, you know, the world towards multipolarity. It's the only civilization that doesn't have the moral debt that every other civilization. Because China, they're pretty cool, they're pretty chill, but they've still done some pretty stuff, you know.
Yep.
They have, you know. They had their own internal issues, Tiananmen Square, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Obviously, Europe is like the cradle of devil, like freaking demonic shit. They're the fathers of colonialism, so they're obviously like the most morally bankrupt civilization ever known. America sucks.
Man.
freaking South America, like they are corrupt, bro. Like I understand that America like toppled your shit, but like there are issues in South America that make it so that they can't be the moral head. Also, you have to understand that they merged with Portugal and Spain in a way that like you can't decouple that.
Yeah, Brazil is essentially like a Portugal 2.0.
Yeah. Argentina sucks, low key. They want to be white. And that's it.
If you'd like, you can kind of go through like, even though this seems abstract right now, but to those young listeners in Africa, in the diaspora, how do we make multipolarity like actionable today? Because again, you can literally speak to what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a pivotal question, isn't it? What with the West loves to keep things pie in the sky and not actually operationalize stuff. I am, starting with that kind of narrative piece. I've been connecting with policy and think tanks, getting my ideas out as efficiently as possible. I'll be moving to Ethiopia soon enough, and it's a matter of trying to make multipolar Africa possible by 2040, 2050. It's a world where the AU operates like the EU, but better. Because how do I tie it to material things? It's that this isn't just about, going from unipolar to multipolar. This is literally about surviving, period. That was the third piece. Recursion is the AI stuff, Ternary AI. Sovereignty is, the governmental piece of things and making African nations more powerful. But like that last piece, survivability, the way that we do things right now will kill us. Like, humanity will go extinct. That is that's not up for debate. It's not pie in the sky. It's like now. Floods are happening. Freaking temperature is rising.
Warmer than ever. Yeah.
Us down like with a mallet, with a metaphysical mallet. There are trillions of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. No balance sheet, no capital finagling, no, cool investment into a startup is going to fix that. That's not gonna the way that the world works, neoliberalism, capitalism, patriarchy, that stuff does not work. It will literally kill us. Yep. And the thing is that as we shift to multipolarity, we have to make sure that BRICS, SCO, New Development Bank, these institutions, they don't become just a 2.0 version of the EU, of America, of Israel, of things of that nature. Because if you just, I created this analogy recently, like if you just take the wheel, that is this like car of civilization, and you just leave it at that, you're still gonna be driving off a cliff. You just now have control of the wheel. So like, what's the difference there? No, you have to make the car itself stop using fossil fuel, and you also have to make everyone in the car start, working together rather than beating on each other as we just careen off the cliff. That is the situation that we're in right now. Multipolarity, it isn't some like political project where people are like, oh yeah, like I want more power and like this and that. Like maybe, yes, that is like the surface level for some international actors. Like I won't say names, but like, yeah, it might be. Mm-hmm. The basis of it, the reason why it's happening so quickly, where this feels like an inflection point rather than like a gradual change, is because it is a visceral, deep in the bones feeling that people are starting to get, where they're just like, this is not sustainable. We can't do this anymore. That is what's happening. That's why, Jinping, Putin, and Modi, and freaking Kim Jong-un are just freaking buddying up in a way that they never have before. They feel it on an ontological level, What I can say in terms of, the average person, like what you can do, like, I know we talked about that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, the idea of like how when you go against your set, ways, when you go against like what you usually do as a human being, and you start living not just opposite of what you do, but start living more fully in your truth, that literally changes not only your life, but everyone who interacts with you. Get out of the scarcity mindset, just start looking for, organizations and causes that you can not even that you can like contribute to, because that's the thing. I don't even like freaking like American based NGOs or you know like freaking protesting or picketing. Like literally just like I told one of my friends, I was just like, dude, like go to China, become an English like as a second language teacher. Just do something that like you know in your heart does not add to the capitalistic machine / you know that you have to start giving your energy towards you know non-extractive you know pathways. It's it's a matter you know like right now my main project in terms of storytelling, Prodigal Rule. You know, I'm trying to use African cosmology in comic form. It's kind of been slow going because the way that like I get external forces just trying to slow me down. I could have made a fully operational Uhuru AI prototype that I could have like sent to people and stuff by now, but it's just like, nah, I'm not. I'm going to keep on like working on the kind of a storytelling lane, not even just like telling Prodigal Rule, but just creating, you know, a sphere of storytelling by these posts, by interacting with people, because you know, that's something that they can't co-opt. That's another thing. You know, just create things that can't be co-opted, that can't be subverted, however you can. By 2050, Africa needs to be a single market that is rooted in plurality, rather than just like a bunch of disparate markets. Like people
100%.
talk about how you have to treat every African country differently, like they have different cultures and whatnot. But like we need to get closer and closer to having an umbrella.
Asian.
You know.
Yep. It's like a family. Yeah, it should be one family with 54 kids, you know. So we should have like a unified way. Like if somebody wants to come and mess around with my kid, you're like, you know what, buddy, you know, just here's an intake. Okay. You know, you kind of want to go and drill in the Congo. No problem. But we have this body of, you know, like the board of, I don't know, mining for Africa. They can look at the documentation to your point. What are the deals like with the IMF, et cetera, et cetera? How does this actually benefit us, you know? And then what are you getting in return? And then you can go to the officials in Congo and say, hey, we've done our review. This is our recommendation. Take it or leave it. But ultimately, we want you to do X, you know? So having that central unification of power, I think will be very important.